Hey, how's it going guys? It's Nate here. And Skyrim is a game peppered with a colorful and diverse cast of characters. From sneaky underground assassins to heroic warriors bent on fighting for their homeland, The Elder Scrolls V is a game with quite a few interesting faces. However, some of these faces may seem a bit familiar if you know where to look, as a handful of Skyrim's NPCs have actually made appearances in previous Elder Scrolls games, with varying roles, and by the time Skyrim takes place, many have changed quite a bit. I find these returning men in Mer extremely fascinating, so today we'll be taking a look at just some of them, as we dive into 5 recurring characters you may have missed in The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. Starting off, we have Ulfgar the Unending. He's a Nordic warrior the Dragonborn can meet amongst a variety of spirits in Sovngarde's Hall of Valor. When you find him in-game, he at first doesn't seem very significant, and can easily be written off as just another one of those characters meant to take up space. He lacks any unique dialogue, and will sort of just hang out in the hall all day, eating and singing with his fellow fallen Nords. However, he may be a bit recognizable to anyone who's played Morrowind's Blood Moon DLC, as in that Elder Scrolls 3 expansion, near Brodir Grove, Ulfgar the Unending was a Nord warrior you could meet tucked away in a small cave. When spoken to, he would ask the player to give them one last fight and a good death, so that he could be sent to Sovngarde. Very similar to the Ebony Warrior in Skyrim. Anyway, if the Neravine obliged, you would simply defeat him in battle, and get to loot his unique sword named Stormfang as a reward. And that would be that. Now, funnily enough, in Skyrim's Dragonborn DLC, you can even get Ulfgar the Unending sword, Stormfang, for yourself. It'll be in the possession of a few Reavers, held up in none other than Brodir Grove. To be honest, it's not that great of a weapon, but it is really cool, and I'm pretty impressed that Bethesda decided to reference this character not only in vanilla Skyrim, but in its final DLC as well. But apparently in this universe, Ulfgar did get his wish after all, and will spend eternity in Sovngarde with his ancestors. So long as you take care of Alduin, that is. Next on our list, we trade the serene spiritual lands of Sovngarde for the shores of Solstheim, where, barricaded within the ruins of Fort Frostmoth, the player can find General Fulks. He's an undead Imperial, and an antagonist in the quest March of the Dead. According to letters the player can find throughout the crumbling fortress, and some journal entries written by a not-so-kind-hearted necromancer, Fulks was once the commander of Fort Frostmoth centuries ago, when the Empire still exercised control over Solstheim. But following the eruption of the Red Mountain on Vardenfell, Caius and his men were killed, and their fort left to be consumed by the ashen elements. Though, shortly before the events of Skyrim kicked off, he was resurrected by a necromancer named Ildari Sorrowthrill, using a type of artifact known as a Heartstone. When you meet Fulks for yourself, you'll notice that he dons a unique set of armor, somewhat resembling a Penitus Oculatus chess piece with the Heartstone in the middle. It looks really cool if I'm being honest. Fulks will be totally hostile to the player upon detection. However, when fighting you, will say some unique lines of dialogue. It's clear that, what after dying and being resurrected hundreds of years later, Fulks has sort of lost his mind. Now, the thing is, just like Ulfgar, General Fulks was a character in the Elder Scrolls III Morrowind's Blood Moon expansion, which also took place on Solstheim, where he could be found none other than inside of Fort Frostmoth, with the Imperial garrison. Now, in Morrowind, his title was Captain Fulks. However, in Skyrim, he's referred to as General. So clearly between the events of the DLC and his death, he got a pretty neat promotion. What I find so unfortunate is that in Morrowind, Fulks was a really stand-up and sometimes even heroic guy. He clearly cared about his duty and his men. So it's a shame to see that his remains have been so desecrated since. I suppose that's all the more reason to lay him back to rest, and take care of the necromancer responsible, once and for all. Coming at number 3, we have Udrfright. This is a unique named troll the Dragonborn can encounter upon their first visit to the Dark Brotherhood's Dawnstar Sanctuary. He's not a part of any quests, nor offers any dialogue. I know, how shocking. But has a somewhat unique appearance due to his green eyes, and will also put up a considerably tougher fight than most of his fellow trolls due to higher HP and damage output. He kind of functions as a mini-boss if you want to look at it that way. But we've actually crossed paths with this character, or at least a relative of theirs, in not just one, but 2 previous Elder Scrolls titles. In Morrowind, the Udrfright was a similar troll-like creature, who is the subject of the quest, the Mead Hall Massacre. After it destroyed a large, Mead Hall, a few locals would approach the player, and ask that you track it down and murder it to death in retaliation. Which you would do. But clearly that wasn't the end. As in the Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion, the Utherfreicht Matron was a troll you could find hiding in the hills of High County in northeastern Cyrodiil. Some journal entries you can uncover on corpses nearby reveal that some of the survivors of the Thirskmead Hall attack in Morrowind actually began to fear that the Utherfreicht they had faced had relatives, and was only one of many. They eventually learned that it was the offspring of the Matron, who was somewhere here in Cyrodiil. They set off from their homeland to defeat the beast. But as you can probably tell, it didn't go well for them. Thankfully, you could conquer this troll for yourself. But clearly, considering there's another Utherfreicht in Skyrim, even with the Matron out of the picture, not all of these foes have been eradicated. So it once more falls again upon you to continue the crusade against these beasts. For 4th spot, you can encounter the skeletal remains of a man once named Centurion within the dwarven ruins of Blackreach. He can be found inside of a small makeshift laboratory within an old Dwemer home, and inside of it, the Dovahkiin can also find his journal, in which Centurion describes himself as a bit of a Nirnroot enthusiast and researcher from Cyrodiil. In his diary, Centurion states that he's always been fascinated by the plants and the mystery behind Nirnroots. Eventually, he was one day approached by a man claiming to be an adventurer from Skyrim. The man told Centurion of a strange red Nirnroot he found while in Blackreach, and sold the researcher a sample he had and instructions on how to get to the underground cave. Desperate for more knowledge, the alchemist soon made the trek from the Imperial homeland all the way to the depths of Blackreach, where he set up this small laboratory and planned to continue his research. Reading his journal will automatically start the quest, A Return to Your Roots, which will task the player with finding 30 Crimson Nirnroots. My god, is that not difficult to do, might I add? And returning them to one of the folks Centurion mentioned earlier in his diary, and informing them of his passing. Now, as you can probably already assume just by the nature of this video, we've met Centurion before. In the Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion, he was an Altmer alchemist living in Skingrad, who had assigned the hero of Kvatch a quest called Seeking Your Roots, wherein you could return Nirnroot samples to him for a variety of alchemical potions and coin. He was a pretty nice guy. Alas, hundreds of years later, it would appear his great study of the plant costed him his life at the hands of a couple Dwemer automations that thought he was trespassing. At least you can continue his work. Though, to be honest, that quest is so tedious, I really recommend you don't. And finally, last on our list, we set our sails back to the chunk of land surrounded by sea that is the island of Solstheim. Specifically, to a location called the Altar of Thrond, where you can find a strange sacrificial, well, altar next to a cave entrance. The cavern itself is quite small. However, upon your entry, you'll immediately be ambushed by 3 Hag Ravens, who clearly aren't happy about being solicited. But the cool thing here is that these Hag Ravens are all named. Isobel, Felice, and Etine, to be specific. Now, this at first comes off as rather difficult to make sense of. None of these bird people have any special dialogue or associated quests. So, like the Utherfreicht, it does seem a bit odd they were given names. Well, all the way back in none other than Tez 3's Blood Moon DLC, Isobel, Felice, and Etine were all very much human, specifically Imperial sisters, who the player could meet. Their main purpose in the game was to help the player cure themselves of lycanthropy, or werewolf disease. They too also resided at the Altar of Thrond. According to conversations you could have with them in Blood Moon, they all specifically traveled to Solstheim to try and help as many of those cursed with being werewolves as possible. Which seems like a pretty noble goal at first, until you realize that it involved human sacrifices and a whole lot of not so noble things. But regardless, they did help the player quite a bit, so that's what counts, I guess. However, evidently, sometime between Blood Moon and Skyrim, they became Hag Ravens, and a whole lot less welcoming of outsiders. Considering there are what seem to be sacrifices all around the cave in Skyrim, perhaps even in Hag Raven form, the sisters are still doing their best to fight against lycanthropy. Or maybe now the rituals have an even more nefarious purpose. Whatever the case, it's unfortunate to see these characters having fallen so far from grace. But with those final familiar faces, we are going to wrap up. 5 recurring characters you may have missed in The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. Thanks for stopping by, everyone. Which of the NPCs that we went over today did you find to be the coolest or most interesting? For me, that honor easily goes to Fulks Caius. Did you maybe already recognize any of these characters? What NPCs do you know of that appeared in previous Elder Scrolls games and Skyrim that I've yet to cover? Leave a comment down below. As always, like ratings are very much appreciated. Again, thanks for watching, and I hope to catch you all in my next video. Peace out, everybody.